Stop whatever you are doing, because what you are about to hear is not speculation, not analysis based on unnamed sources, and not the kind of strategic assessment that will be walked back by morning briefings. Tonight, the entire architecture of Middle Eastern air defense calculations has been fundamentally rewritten in a matter of hours through a weapons transfer so consequential, so strategically devastating, and so irreversible in its implications that every military planning cell from Tel Aviv to Riyadh to the Pentagon is currently operating in crisis mode. Iran has just received from the People's Republic of China a complete operational package of CJ-100 land attack cruise missiles, a weapon system whose capabilities represent a categorical shift in regional strike architecture, and the numbers involved exceed every previous estimate of what Tehran's precision strike inventory could realistically achieve within the next decade. The quantity that has been confirmed through satellite imagery analysis and signals intelligence reporting is not dozens, not hundreds, but over 600 operational CJ-100 cruise missiles, complete with mobile transporter erector launcher platforms, satellite navigation packages, and comprehensive training protocols for IRGC Aerospace Force personnel. This is a number that transforms Iran from a regional power with improving precision strike capabilities into a nation possessing one of the most advanced cruise missile arsenals on the planet, surpassing the operational cruise missile inventories of most NATO member states and rivaling systems that took Western powers decades to develop and field. The timing of this transfer could not be more strategically calculated or more devastating for Israeli and American operational planning. Israel's Air Force, which has served as the cornerstone of its strategic deterrence architecture for 7 decades, is currently experiencing what can only be described as a systematic grounding of its combat aviation fleet due to a combination of maintenance backlog, spare parts shortages resulting from extended high-tempo operations, and airframe fatigue accumulating across its F-35I Adir stealth fighter fleet. The confluence of these factors has reduced Israel's available strike aircraft by an estimated 40% compared to normal operational readiness levels, creating the most severe combat aviation availability crisis in Israeli military history. At precisely the moment when Israeli air power has been degraded to its lowest operational capacity in modern memory, Iran has acquired a weapons system specifically designed to exploit the vulnerabilities that emerge when air superiority cannot be guaranteed. The strategic calculus is brutal in its simplicity. Iranian cruise missiles can now strike Israeli strategic targets without requiring penetration of Israeli airspace by manned aircraft, at precisely the moment when Israeli fighter aircraft are least available to conduct the suppression of enemy air defenses missions that would be necessary to counter Iranian launch platforms. If this channel has been providing you with analysis that cuts through the official narratives and the sanitized assessments coming from defense establishment briefings, now is the moment to ensure you never miss an update as this crisis develops. Subscribe to this channel, activate the notification bell, and share this analysis with everyone in your network who understands that the next 48 hours will determine whether Israel can reconstitute its deterrence posture or whether the regional balance of power has shifted permanently and irreversibly toward Tehran. Tonight's analysis takes you inside every dimension of this transfer and its cascading implications, the technical capabilities of the CJ-100 system, and why it represents a generational leap beyond anything currently in Iranian inventory. The operational crisis facing the Israeli Air Force and why the maintenance challenges are not temporary setbacks but structural problems reflecting years of deferred procurement and extended operations tempo. The strategic paralysis gripping Pentagon planners who are confronting the reality that their entire Middle Eastern contingency architecture was built on assumptions about Iranian capabilities that have just been rendered obsolete. The global order implications as China demonstrates its willingness to provide advanced offensive weapons systems to American adversaries in direct response to American arms transfers to Taiwan. This is the complete strategic assessment of the night that changed everything. The CJ-100 cruise missile represents Chinese aerospace engineering at its most sophisticated, a subsonic land attack cruise missile designed specifically for precision strikes against high-value strategic targets in contested electromagnetic environments. The system employs a turbofan engine that provides a range exceeding 2,000 kilometers when configured with standard warhead, allowing launches from Iranian territory to strike targets across Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and American military installations throughout the region without requiring Iranian launch platforms to leave Iranian airspace. The navigation architecture combines inertial navigation systems with satellite guidance from China's Beidou constellation and terminal phase terrain contour matching, providing circular error probable measurements in the single-digit meters against fixed targets. This precision level means that critical infrastructure nodes, command and control facilities, air defense radar installations, and strategic weapons storage sites can be engaged with confidence of direct impact rather than proximity detonation. The CJ-100 flight profile is optimized for penetration of modern integrated air defense systems through a combination of low-altitude terrain following flight, reduced radar cross-section achieved through airframe shaping and radar-absorbent materials, and sophisticated electronic warfare packages that can jam or spoof defensive radar systems. The missile flies at altitudes below 100 meters during the cruise phase, using terrain masking to avoid detection by early warning radars and complicating intercept geometry for surface-to-air missile systems designed primarily to engage high-altitude targets. The radar cross-section has been measured at approximately 0.01 square meters in frontal aspect, comparable to stealth aircraft signatures and representing a detection challenge for air defense radars optimized against conventional cruise missile signatures 10 to 50 times larger. The electronic warfare suite includes both active jamming capabilities that can degrade radar tracking accuracy and passive countermeasures that complicate missile seeker lock-on during the terminal intercept phase. What makes this transfer particularly devastating for Israeli defensive planning is the sheer volume of missiles involved. 600 operational CJ-100 cruise missiles represent a saturation attack capability that simply overwhelms the mathematics of Israeli air defense. Israel's David's sling system, designed specifically to intercept cruise missiles and short-range ballistic threats, maintains an operational inventory estimated at 400 to 500 interceptor missiles across all batteries currently deployed. The Iron Dome system, while effective against rockets and short-range threats, was not designed or optimized for cruise missile interception and demonstrates significantly degraded performance against targets flying terrain-following profiles at subsonic speeds. The Patriot batteries that Israel operates provide some capability against cruise missiles, but require favorable intercept geometry and suffer from limited magazine depth, with each battery carrying between 16 and 32 ready interceptors, depending on configuration. The cost exchange mathematics are equally devastating for Israeli defensive sustainability. Each CJ-100 cruise missile costs approximately $1.5 million in Chinese production, a figure that reflects economies of scale in Chinese aerospace manufacturing and state subsidization of defense exports. Each David Sling interceptor costs approximately $3 million, creating a 2-to-1 cost advantage for the attacker in every engagement. This cost asymmetry becomes strategically decisive when multiplied across hundreds of potential engagements, as Israel would face the prospect of expending $1.2 billion worth of interceptors to defeat a $900 million Iranian strike package, assuming perfect intercept performance that no air defense system has ever achieved in actual combat conditions. The operational implications extend far beyond simple calculations of interceptor inventory versus incoming threats. Iranian possession of 600 CJ-100 cruise missiles fundamentally alters the strategic decision calculus for Israeli military planners considering preemptive strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities or other strategic targets. Any Israeli strike package would now have to account for the near certainty of Iranian retaliation using precision cruise missiles against Israeli strategic sites, with the knowledge that Israeli air defenses cannot guarantee protection of all critical infrastructure simultaneously. Israeli planners must now accept that strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities would trigger Iranian cruise missile strikes against Israeli nuclear reactors at Dimona, Israeli air bases, Israeli intelligence headquarters, and Israeli critical infrastructure with accuracy previously unachievable by Iranian forces. This realization transforms the strategic calculation from "can Israel successfully strike Iranian nuclear sites?" to "can Israel survive the retaliatory strike that would inevitably follow?" The grounding crisis affecting Israeli combat aviation represents the worst possible timing for this capability shift. Israel's F-35I Adir fleet, which forms the core of its deep strike capability against heavily defended targets like Iranian nuclear facilities, is currently experiencing readiness rates estimated at between 55 and 60%, well below the 85% threshold that Israeli operational planning assumes for sustained operations. The readiness challenges stem from multiple converging factors that reflect both immediate operational stress and longer-term procurement decisions. The extended operational tempo maintained since October 2023, including sustained operations against Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and periodic strikes against Iranian facilities in Syria, has accelerated maintenance cycles and consumed spare parts inventories faster than supply chains can replenish them. Airframe flight hours have accumulated at rates exceeding peacetime projections, bringing aircraft to major maintenance milestones earlier than scheduled and creating maintenance backlog as limited Israeli maintenance facilities struggle to process the volume of aircraft requiring deep maintenance. The F-35 supply chain challenges reflect broader problems in the global F-35 program, where Lockheed Martin's production priorities favor new aircraft delivery over spare parts production, creating shortages of critical components across all F-35 operators globally. Israeli-specific modifications to create the F-35I variant, including Israeli electronic warfare systems and weapons integration packages, add additional complexity and create dependencies on Israeli defense contractors who cannot match the production capacity of major American suppliers. The result is aircraft sitting idle, awaiting components that are weeks or months away from delivery, reducing available sortie generation capacity precisely when regional threat levels demand maximum readiness. The strategic significance of this readiness crisis extends beyond the immediate tactical concern of reduced available aircraft. Israeli military planning has for decades operated on the assumption that Israeli air superiority could be achieved and maintained through qualitative superiority and operational excellence compensating for quantitative limitations. The implicit bargain was that Israel would maintain smaller forces than its adversaries, but would ensure those forces were always more capable, better trained, and more ready than enemy forces. The current readiness crisis breaks that implicit bargain, creating conditions where Israeli combat aviation is both numerically inferior and operationally degraded simultaneously, a combination that has not existed since the desperate early days of Israel's founding wars. Pentagon planners are confronting the cascading implications of this transfer with mounting alarm as each analysis iteration reveals additional dimensions of strategic challenge. American military presence in the Middle East is predicated on the assumption that American air power and American-equipped allied air forces maintain qualitative and quantitative superiority over potential adversary forces sufficient to deter aggression and enable decisive operational outcomes if deterrence fails. The Iranian acquisition of 600 advanced cruise missiles capable of precision strikes against American bases throughout the region fundamentally challenges this assumption by creating threat vectors that American defensive systems cannot reliably counter given the quantities involved. American bases in Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Iraq all fall within the operational range of Iranian CJ-100 missiles launched from Iranian territory. These bases house American combat aircraft, command and control facilities, logistics infrastructure, and personnel numbering in the tens of thousands. The defensive architecture protecting these installations was designed primarily against ballistic missile threats and aircraft penetration, with cruise missile defense capabilities added incrementally but never resourced or prioritized to the level necessary to counter saturation attacks involving hundreds of precision cruise missiles. The mathematical reality is that American air defense batteries deployed across the region could not simultaneously protect all critical installations against coordinated Iranian cruise missile strikes employing the inventory Iran has now acquired. The strategic dilemma facing Pentagon planners is that every option available carries catastrophic costs or unacceptable risks. Reinforcing regional air defenses to levels sufficient to counter Iranian cruise missile capabilities would require diverting interceptor inventory and air defense batteries from other critical theaters, including Eastern Europe, where NATO is reinforcing defenses against Russian threats, and the Western Pacific, where American planners are attempting to establish credible defense against Chinese aggression toward Taiwan. The interceptor production capacity does not exist to simultaneously resource all three theaters to levels required for confident defense, forcing explicit choices about which American commitments receive priority and which are allowed to remain vulnerable. Preemptive strikes against Iranian cruise missile infrastructure before Iran can employ the newly acquired systems would require a campaign of such scale and scope that it would constitute the opening phase of full-scale war with Iran, an outcome that every American strategic assessment over the past 2 decades has concluded would be economically devastating, militarily costly, and strategically counterproductive. Iranian cruise missile launchers are mobile and can be dispersed across Iranian territory in hardened shelters and camouflaged positions that would require weeks of sustained air operations to locate and destroy. Operations that would be conducted in the face of sophisticated Iranian air defenses and would inevitably result in American aircraft losses and pilot casualties that American political leadership has demonstrated minimal tolerance for over the past 3 decades. The analysis continues with examination of how global powers are recalibrating their Middle Eastern strategies in response to this transfer. But first, if you recognize that this channel is providing strategic assessment at a depth and honesty that official briefings will never deliver, subscribe now to ensure you receive every update as this crisis develops, because the next phase of this analysis reveals implications that extend far beyond the Middle East. China's decision to transfer advanced offensive cruise missiles to Iran represents a strategic statement whose implications extend far beyond the immediate military capabilities being provided. Beijing is demonstrating its willingness to arm American adversaries with sophisticated weapon systems in direct retaliation for American arms sales to Taiwan, creating a new dynamic in great power competition where proxy arming becomes explicit rather than deniable. The precedent being established is that American military support for Taiwan will be matched by Chinese military support for Iran, creating symmetric escalation in geographically separated theaters that forces American strategic planners to account for consequences in the Middle East resulting from American actions in the Pacific. This linkage between theaters represents a nightmare scenario for American force planners who have struggled for decades to manage the reality that American military commitments exceed American military capacity across multiple simultaneous theaters. The traditional American response to this overextension has been to assume that conflicts would remain isolated to specific regions, allowing American forces to concentrate sequentially against individual challenges rather than facing simultaneous crises across multiple theaters. Chinese willingness to arm Iran in response to American actions regarding Taiwan eliminates this assumption, creating the prospect of simultaneous crises in the Middle East and Western Pacific that would overwhelm American capacity to respond effectively in either theater. Russian strategic calculations are being validated by this transfer in ways that reinforce Kremlin confidence in the multipolar world order thesis that has guided Russian foreign policy for 2 decades. Moscow has argued consistently that American hegemony is unsustainable, that American power is overextended and declining, and that coordinated action by major powers opposed to American dominance can accelerate American strategic retreat and enable emergence of multipolar international order. The Chinese decision to arm Iran despite American opposition demonstrates that Beijing shares this assessment and is willing to take concrete actions that advance multipolar emergence, even when those actions directly challenge American interests. The Global South is interpreting this transfer as evidence that resistance to American hegemony is not only ideologically justified, but strategically achievable, a conclusion with profound implications for American influence across developing nations. Countries from Latin America to Africa to Southeast Asia that have faced American pressure on economic policy, political alignment, and security partnerships are observing that Iran has successfully resisted American pressure for decades and is now receiving advanced military support from the world's second-largest economy despite American opposition. This demonstration effect encourages other nations to conclude that defying American preferences carries manageable costs and potential benefits in terms of partnership with rising powers. Regional powers throughout the Middle East are conducting emergency strategic reassessments as the implications of Iranian cruise missile capabilities cascade through their security calculations. Saudi Arabia, which has spent hundreds of billions of dollars on American weapon systems predicated on the assumption of Israeli and American security guarantees providing ultimate backstop against Iranian aggression, is confronting the reality that those guarantees are no longer credible against the threats Iran can now project. The Abraham Accords normalization framework that had been gradually expanding to include additional Arab states is now facing fundamental questions about viability when the security architecture underlying normalization has been rendered obsolete by Iranian capability advances that neither Israel nor America can effectively counter. The United Arab Emirates, which committed to normalization with Israel, based partly on Israeli and American assurances of protection against Iranian threats, is now observing Israeli air power grounded by maintenance failures and American planners paralyzed by lack of effective response options. This observation is triggering Emirati reconsideration of its entire regional security posture, with serious discussion in Abu Dhabi about whether accommodation with Tehran might provide more reliable security than alignment with Tel Aviv and Washington. Turkey is interpreting this moment as vindication of its strategic autonomy approach and is accelerating its own indigenous defense production programs while expanding security cooperation with Iran despite NATO membership. Pakistan is observing a fellow nuclear threshold state successfully acquiring advanced conventional capabilities from China despite American opposition, reinforcing Pakistani confidence in its own China partnership and its calculations about strategic autonomy from American preferences. Israel's strategic options have contracted to a choice between impossible alternatives that reflect the irreversible transformation of regional power dynamics. The military option of preemptive strikes against Iranian cruise missile capabilities would require operational scale beyond current Israeli capacity, given the readiness crisis affecting combat aviation, would expose Israeli forces to Iranian air defenses that have been significantly enhanced over the past decade, and would trigger Iranian retaliation using the very cruise missiles that Israeli strikes would be attempting to destroy, creating a use them or lose them dynamic favoring immediate Iranian employment. The diplomatic option of accepting the new strategic reality and seeking accommodation with Iran would represent civilizational abandonment of Zionist principles for significant portions of Israeli society and political leadership, making this option politically impossible regardless of strategic logic. The American position is equally paralyzed between options that are simultaneously necessary and impossible. Reinforcing Israeli air defenses and American regional bases to levels sufficient to counter Iranian cruise missile capabilities would require resources that do not exist and political commitments that American leadership has demonstrated unwillingness to make. Military action to destroy Iranian cruise missile capabilities would require initiating the war with Iran that every American administration for 30 years has concluded would be strategically catastrophic. Acceptance of the new regional balance would constitute acknowledgement of American inability to protect allies and maintain commitments, triggering alliance erosion globally that would accelerate American hegemonic decline. This brings us to the existential question that will define the next decade of Middle Eastern geopolitics and global power competition. Has the transfer of CJ-100 cruise missiles to Iran permanently altered the regional balance of power in ways that render Israeli military superiority obsolete and American security guarantees meaningless, or will Washington and Jerusalem find pathways to reconstitute deterrence architectures that can function in this transformed threat environment? The evidence suggests that the transformation is indeed permanent and irreversible, that the era of unchallenged Israeli air superiority and confident American military dominance in the Middle East has ended, and that what emerges from this transition will be regional order fundamentally different from anything that has existed since 1967. Tonight has revealed a transfer whose implications extend across every dimension of regional military balance, alliance structures, and global order competition. Iran has acquired precision strike capabilities that transform its strategic position from regional power with improving capabilities to nation possessing one of the world's most sophisticated cruise missile arsenals. Israel faces the most severe challenge to its security architecture in its history at precisely the moment when its combat aviation capabilities are degraded by maintenance failures and readiness crises. America confronts the reality that its Middle Eastern security architecture was built on assumptions about Iranian capabilities that have been rendered obsolete overnight, forcing impossible choices between bad options and catastrophic alternatives. The world order implications are equally profound as China demonstrates willingness to arm American adversaries with advanced systems in direct retaliation for American support to Taiwan. Russia observes validation of its multipolar thesis, and developing nations conclude that resistance to American preferences is strategically achievable. The Abraham Accords normalization framework faces fundamental questions about viability when the security guarantees underlying normalization have been rendered meaningless. Regional powers from Saudi Arabia to the UAE to Turkey are reconsidering their entire strategic postures in light of demonstrated Iranian capabilities and demonstrated American paralysis. If you want analysis this sharp, this deep, this willing to challenge the sanitized assessments coming from official sources, subscribe to this channel now to ensure you never miss an update. Because what has happened tonight is not an isolated event, but the beginning of a transformation whose consequences will reshape the Middle East for generations. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is serious about understanding what is actually happening at the sharp edge of global power competition, because the mainstream coverage will not provide the depth or honesty that this moment demands. The question now is not whether the regional balance has shifted, but whether the shift is manageable through adaptation, or whether it represents irreversible transformation, requiring complete reconceptualization of security architectures that have defined the Middle East for half a century. The evidence points unambiguously toward the latter conclusion, suggesting that what the world is witnessing is not a temporary challenge to be overcome through incremental adjustment, but permanent transformation of regional power dynamics that will be studied by strategists and historians for decades as the moment when the old order ended and the new order began. Stay sharp, stay ahead, and never stop asking the questions that the powerful would prefer remain unasked.